Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the ACE and Ethnicity panel. I'm Yasmin Benoit. I'm a model and aromantic asexuality activist and a board member for AVEN, and I'm going to be hosting the panel today. The intersectionality between ethnicity and asexuality is a central point in my activism and what I represent. I've taken part in this panel twice as a participant. This is my first time on the other side of things, but I had the opportunity to select a very amazing group of panelists, many of which I have followed for a long time or met in real life. More of them are actually supposed to be here, but we didn't want to keep you waiting. So we thought we would jump straight into things, and then hopefully our other two panelists will join in as we go. Oh, Leah's here. Okay, cool. There we go.
Hi.
We've got one more. We're just waiting on one more person, but I thought we'll start things off anyway. So in the order that you appear on the screen, so starting this way, could you introduce yourselves?
Hi everyone, my name is Richard. I am 24. I'm actually 25 tomorrow. My pronouns he, him. I identify as a heteroromantic asexual. I'm British. My parents are both from Malaysia though, but I was born in the UK. For work, I kind of basically teach people how to code. I work in tech, and in tech, it's notoriously terrible for diversity and inclusion. So a lot of what I do is focused around helping underrepresented people to tech. So for example, I work with a nonprofit which helps refugees get into tech, and I also teach Black women who are kind of learning how to code. And yeah, it's great to be here.
Marshall?
Oh, sorry. Hi, all. My name is Marshall John Blount. I am 27, and my pronouns are he and him, and I'm from the city of Erie, Pennsylvania, and I am an ACE activist from Western Pennsylvania. I started from being on my local LGBT board, but I moved on to asexual outreach. So I hope that's a good introduction.
Well, thank you both. Michelle has just joined. This is our final panelist. And conveniently, you've appeared right next in the lineup. So, Michelle, could you introduce yourself to everybody, please?
Hello, everyone. Sorry, I had some technical difficulties, but I'm here. I'm Michelle. I use all pronouns and ta, and I'm 20, and I'm a student at UC Berkeley. I am a panromantic asexual, and I'm an intersectional activist. And last year, I held the first ACE Week at UC Berkeley, and also I run a space on campus for ACEPEX. It's called Cal ACE Space. And yeah, and other than that, I'm pretty much just a student, and I'm also a dancer. Thank you.
Thank you. Leah, your turn.
Hello, Leah. She, her pronouns, and I identify as biromantic ace. And for my job, I just activities coordinator. Like I work with the elderly and do fun things with them and stuff like that. And that's it.
Thank you, Pragati.
Hi, I'm Pragati, but I will go with Pragati as well. That's all right. I'm from India, and I founded and I continue to run the Indian Asexual Collective. We're called the Indian Aces. There's a lot of things that I do with Indian Aces in our country. A lot of it has to do with the intersection of asexuality with ethnicity, with the South Asian culture, with the Indian culture. So I'm excited about this panel. Thanks.
Yes, thank you all for being here. I have met in person Leah and Richard, both at the exact same occasion, and I follow Marshall, Pragati, and Michelle on social media. So it's awesome that you're all able to be here. For those, if this is your first panel, you use the SliDo website to submit your questions, and then you can upvote the questions that you like the best, and then that will be fed to me by the moderator, and then I will ask panelists. So yeah, that's how it's going to work. But I thought I would open things off with my own question while you guys think of what you want to ask and pick your favorites. So first of all, I wanted to ask, let me get it on the screen. Oh, can I get it on the screen? There we go. Do you think that your ethnicity has influenced the way your asexuality is perceived by other people?
I guess.
In order of the.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So yes. So my experience being I'm British Chinese, and there's in popular culture that if you're a Southeast Asian man, you're typically not seen as that sort of romantic kind of attractive lead in like movies and things like that. And so I think what that's actually meant for me is kind of my asexuality, like obviously not like a deliberate decision, but kind of plays into that trope a little bit. And so in a way, that has kind of, for me, I think meant people probably reconcile themselves to it or accepted it more easily because there's less of that cognitive dissonance. Because to begin with, they've not seen me as somebody who would typically be kind of object of kind of sexual attraction, I think. So, I mean, to be honest, as a personal experience, what that's meant is probably actually I've had fewer objections to it. So actually, from a like purely individual perspective, it's been like fine for me. But I'm aware of how it plays into that kind of broader sort of ethnic stereotype, which is obviously harmful for a lot of people. So I think, in short, it has changed the way it's perceived. I myself, I've not encountered individual problems, but I think, you know, that itself is symptomatic of something problematic underneath it.
So for you as an experience, are you kind of like, okay, well, that worked out in a weird way, or are you more kind of bothered by the fact that that is the reason why people accept your asexuality thought stuff?
It's a good question. So I think that selfishly, it has been like pretty handy for me, frankly. But there's a sort of like double think of like I also feel guilty for it in a way which I know it's not in my control. I shouldn't feel guilty for it, but I feel guilty about reinforcing a stereotype that I know is harmful. So it comes with that kind of baggage as well.
Right. And I find that the experience for Black people is kind of, at least from my perspective, is kind of the opposite. I feel like we're more hypersexualized, particularly in Western cultures. So Marshall, how do you think that the stereotypes for Black people and Black men has impacted the way your asexuality is perceived?
It's definitely something that really impacted, let's just say, when I came out, and people automatically assumed that I was looking for like the typical route of marriage, a family, stuff like that. In Black American culture, it's typical for family in your 20s to like be like, so who are you with, or like stuff like that. So when I came out as asexual, that came as a shock to a lot of people. It definitely broke a lot of perceptions that have been that unfortunately we've been stereotyped by for centuries. So it's definitely something that has impacted me personally. It's hopefully something that it's hopefully a misconception that I could help break.
Thank you. Michelle?
Yeah, so I'm Asian American, I'm Chinese American, and I've always lived in the United States my entire life. I was born here, and I totally relate to what Richard just said, but I feel that because I experienced everything as a woman, it definitely is extremely kind of the opposite, but I totally understand how it feels to be feel kind of responsible or guilty for some stereotypes that you're reinforcing. But I think for me personally, Asian women in the West are extremely fetishized and extremely just seen as this exotic kind of sexual being, which has a lot of problems just on its own. But I think that in terms of my sexuality, it can seem as if I'm trying to go against that stereotype actively. But that's not really true. That's not how I've felt. That's not my reason for identifying as asexual. It's not because of a stereotype, not really a reaction or anything. But I think that a lot of times people in general will view it as a reaction and kind of invalidate it by saying that, oh, you're just identifying this way because of this stereotype and you're trying to fight against it, which obviously we try to fight against stereotypes and everything, but I think that a person's identity goes far beyond stereotypes and far beyond what everybody else views you as and sees you as. So I think that it's just generally kind of invalidating when people always like to bring in stereotypes when kind of trying to understand my identity. But yeah, it does kind of create this really weird space that I'm in where it's simultaneously hypersexual and also me being asexual. It seems like very contrasting and conflicting.
Yeah, I could definitely relate to to
Yeah,
being in that space
for sure.
myself. Leah, what about your experiences?
Mine?
Leah? Yeah.
Yes, mine. Oh, I think to this day I'm still not believed. It's like I get questions like, I don't know, it's just not believable. Um it's either I am very much sexualized, and because the way I look, because like I'm large chested and I'm just I don't know, like naturally, some will say flirtatious by nature, and I'd say that, and it's kind of like, oh, you can't be, and it's frustrating to communicate that to other people. Or it's on the other side of me being just completely dead inside, again, because of the way I present myself. And so it's really hard to convey to people about who I am and to do it eloquently. And it's now gotten to the point where I just let people think what they want to think. And it's just easier for me. It's sad, but it's easier for me because I can't escape the narrative that's already there, you know.
Yeah, I think that if it wasn't for my activism being pretty public, then people would not believe me because many did not believe me until it was like clarified in the national media. Prior to that, a lot of people had a hard time accepting that I was asexual. So I definitely get that situation. Pragati, what about you?
Yeah, so in India, I feel like the context is very unique. Not just in India, actually, most South Asian cultures, in that marriage is tied so tightly with sexuality that before marriage, it's almost considered virtuous to not be sexually attracted to anybody. You're considered a good, ideal young person, to not be indulging in anything sexual, to not be doing anything, or to be focusing just on your career or on your studies and not be attracted to anybody is almost considered a virtue, and it is almost put on a pedestal. And then, unfortunately, as soon as you're like 25, you're expected to get married, and arranged marriages are a huge thing in India, right? And then you're suddenly supposed to just flick a switch and become all sexually active immediately on the very night of your marriage. So it's a very interesting place to be, I feel. In some ways, I think it's easier for a lot of Indian people to claim asexuality, but it comes with its own limitations. After a point of time, you're expected to provide and fit into the mold anyway. So I've had some interesting experiences like that.
Yeah, I've noticed that when it comes to specifically perceptions to do with asexual women, it kind of people are a lot more content with you not being sexually attracted to people or sexually active when they think that that's just a lifestyle choice until they realize it's actually an orientation, and then suddenly it's weird, and then it's kind of less accepted within various aspects of society. Thank you all for your answers to that question. We have one that's come from the audience already. Could we get that one on the screen, please? I'll read it out for you anyway. So the question was, this is a good one. Have you faced racism, etc., within the ACE community? And is there anything you wish the community would do to be more actively anti-racist?
Okay, right. I guess I'm kicking off again. I think I have on like a couple of occasions had this sort of like being described as exotic, which is uncomfortable, obviously. I would say it most like that's an exception. That's certainly not a typical experience for me personally. The most uncomfortable part is probably just this feeling of being a minority within a minority, where being asexual obviously already is kind of like, right, okay, well, I feel like there's just not, feeling kind of more isolated because there aren't many of you. And to be a minority within a minority is pretty tricky, just in terms of feelings of like loneliness more than anything, more than sort of for me personally, active kind of experience of racism. So I suppose off the back of that, things which would I think community could do is I suppose, and as part of this I think will be incumbent on someone like me, but outreach to sort of like try to actively diversify the asex community with ethnicity, where there will be certain communities where there will be, in terms of awareness of asexuality, it'll be much lower. And if you can do active outreach things into those communities to try and actively diversify who identifies as asexual, I think that would like help someone like me a bit, but that's probably the extent of my wisdom in that, I think.
Right. Thank you. Marshall?
I've definitely experienced, definitely seen some racism in the ACE community. Basically, when I first started to join groups, when I first came out, I and a lot of people on this thread was calling out a person that was fetishizing Black and Asian folk, and it resulted me leaving that group because the admins were not doing anything about it, and it was to the point where I called them out about it on my personal my personal Facebook account, and basically I got blocked by the admin. So that was actually one of the first moments where I was like, oh, well, I definitely do feel within a minority within a minority, where it was kind of like it was an interesting environment where I did not feel safe. At first, I didn't feel safe until I started searching even further. But even still, you still have to call out a lot. I mean, instances of racism, like in terms of like fetishizing Black and people of color.
Yeah, so that was somebody within the ACE community who was allowing that fetishization to happen within the group.
Yeah, it was a thing that took place over a night. Like it actually resulted in a group that was created by a fellow black ace guy who was tired of the racism that was happening in this group, and it resulted in an exodus of people from that group into the group that he created. But so far, that group is still doing good. I still belong to that group, and it's thriving. Which it's a group that I definitely feel safer in because it has a diverse admin group. As where the other one, it was just like not. It was just very like not listening to minority voices within today's community.
And I think that's something with the with the whole thing of asexual people already being a minority is I think that leads to white asexual people in particular forgetting to check themselves for certain behaviors because they're kind of under the guise of, well, we're a minority too, so we're probably not going to do that, and then they don't really consider. Because I have seen fetishization within the ace community, which I don't think there are as many alarm bells with it because it's coming from asexual people, but there still can be degrees of sexual attraction and romantic attraction there, so you can still definitely be part of that, even if you're asexual. Michelle, what about you?
Yeah, so I think that as one that lived in the US, it's very normal, I think, for me to see racism. I think that up until a couple years ago, I kind of had trained myself not to ever like take note of it. And I think that's just unfortunately kind of a norm that racial minorities have to live with here. But I think in the past year or more, when I've become more active in the ace community, it's become actually more obvious to me when people are racist, because I feel like because we already have this common ground of being ace and understanding each other, that it sticks out more when you see their kind of other behaviors towards your ethnicity. And I feel that most people aren't actively like racist or aren't explicitly like racist just to your face. I think that it comes out more in microaggressions and just kind of subtle things in the ways they describe you or the ways that they approach you. I think that are very racist, and it's kind of throughout. So it's not so much like one instance or one event. It's more just kind of every day and always there, but at kind of a lower level. And that's really extremely unfortunate, obviously. And I think that it's more of just that the people here, um, obviously, it's kind of like a white majority in the community, and especially with visibility, I think that especially the white part of the community is very visible, and the rest of us are just kind of on the side, unfortunately. Um, and I think that most of these people that are very visible or very prominent don't really know how to deal with these microaggressions. They don't know how to kind of call them out, like you said, like they kind of just let it happen, unfortunately, because they don't have experience with facing it, dealing with it as a person of color would. So I think that one of the things that we should be doing is just following people of color and Black and Indigenous people of color in general, in the ace community too. I mean, everywhere, but especially in the ace community. I think that personally, I only feel completely safe. The people I'm with are also people of color. I think that it's hard. It's just hard for us in general everywhere, but here specifically, it can feel like we aren't accepted in this community either. Even within this smaller community, the ace community, it's hard to feel accepted. So I think that it's everyone's responsibility to follow more creators that aren't white.
Yeah, and I find it definitely feels like it's particularly disappointing when you experience it within the ACE community because you kind of already have that, oh, this is a safe space, this is a comfortable space where we all know what it's like to feel kind of outcasted. So everyone should be super accepting and educated. And then when you do see that kind of stuff, then it's kind of, I feel, at least for me, it's additionally disappointing. And I feel like the more work I do and the more I kind of speak to people within the community more, the more I notice its prevalence. Leah, what's your experience?
I don't experience it because I'm not in it. What happens is that I'm on the outside looking in. I kind of like peek behind in the community and see what's happening instead of getting involved. And I see like other people of color, and I see the attack that is put upon them, and it just makes me not want to just be a part of it because I it boggles the mind how, you know, in a space that is already a minority as it is, that it's not, we're not all gelling together. And so I don't experience it, but it's like I see it happen and it hurts the same way, you know. But yeah.
Yeah, I tend to, I mean, it's something that I feel like I was kind of a little bit oblivious to it when I was kind of just dipping my toes in the community. And then it kind of slapped me in the face as time went on. I feel like the more you kind of interact with things, or the more time you spend kind of observing the community, you're more likely you are to notice, rather than if you just kind of identify as asexual but don't really enter many online spaces or physical spaces. Pragati, what about you?
I actually am in India and I don't interact with the international or other ethnicity groups in the asexual community on a day-to-day basis, except online. And fortunately, my experiences so far have been quite pleasant. It's quite possible that if I was living in a context that had other ethnicities, I would have experienced stuff that I haven't yet right now. But having said that, I just want to add a couple of things that are interesting, I think, here is that in India, in our culture, LGBTQIA largely is seen as a Western concept. So we do get a lot of flack for that, meaning because we are brown, we should not be talking about things that are so Western and just be talking about our own culture, which does not necessarily encourage LGBTQIA identities. So that is something that we get a lot. Most LGBTQI people in India do. I think other people also relate to that. And then the third thing that I want to share here is on the question of what is something that people can do within the ACE community to be more accommodative. And I think just being a little more mindful of the fact that we come from very different backgrounds and contexts sometimes, which means we have different levels of access to resources, different levels of access to new information that's popping up, new concepts that are popping up every day. And that it's not possible for everybody to be able to keep pace in the same way that, let's say, a Western person in a Western culture is able to. So that is something that I have experienced and wanted to throw some light on.
Yes, I agree with the constructive points that you all made. I think that one thing that's definitely important for the ACE community to do is just to listen more to minorities and focus on amplifying minority activists as much as you do your favorite white activists. I've noticed that whenever I have called out incidences of racism, I was kind of disturbed by the amount of white aces who found it easier to say that I don't know what I'm talking about, it didn't happen, rather than to admit that there was actually an issue within the community. So I think that's definitely kind of, I feel like there needs to be some self-assessment going on there. The next question from the audience kind of relates to what we're talking about, in the sense of how does your ACE identity and ethnicity affect each other in terms of cultural expectations and marriage? So that's something that Pragati already touched upon a little bit, but what about the rest of you?
So my experience with this, I think a story which symbolizes this is, like I said, both my parents are from Malaysia, so I make occasional trips with them. And in sort of a Southeast Asian culture, like this idea of like heritage, your ancestors is super important. And so on one trip, I've been to visit this sort of like ancestral home where it's, I think, my great-great-grandparents there. And in this home, there's literally like a line of portraits. And it's like this lineage. And it's like almost dynastic in that sort of vibe. And that creates quite a lot of pressure in terms of like, right, well, you know, you're part of this chain of like, you know, these portraits, and like someday your portrait will be here and your portrait, your children, stuff like that. That creates expectations, particularly around things like biological children. And I myself am quite like, I would like to be a father. I'm very pro-adoption for several reasons. You know, I think adoption is it's a good thing to do, obviously, for kids adopting, to kind of, if they're going to the care system, that's not great for them. But also, if I'm honest, one reason why I'm pro-adoption is because natural conception is not something which I find tremendously appealing, obviously. But then that creates, obviously, a sort of like, well, okay, like, what does, the explaining kind of asexuality and like, what does that mean for this like lineage which you've been a part of? And it's almost like a sort of family tree, and the name and the surname, which is like so important, is kind of like, you know, not you know, it's in jeopardy or whatever. So there's certainly like, I think, fraught conversations with elders which can come out as a result of that, where it's not just about it's something they haven't heard about, it's something which they don't know about, but also in some ways it's received as an attack on, the family, the family honor or something like that. I myself, like, I've not spoken to my grandparents about it. I don't really expect to speak to my grandparents about it, to be honest. But like, there's tensions like that which are basically in my mind when I think about the interaction between my kind of ethnic, my cultural heritage and asexuality.
Do you think that would be the same if you were specifically looking to have biological kids? Do you think that they then would not really care so much about the asexuality part? Is that an issue that would probably come up if you weren't asexual but just didn't want to have kids, or you're in that kind of scenario, do you think?
It's a good question. I think my best guess what would happen is if I were to have biological children, my grandparents would be like, oh, great, that's fine. Like, this thing which he spoke to us about this a while ago was clearly nonsense, like this like asexuality thing, like, well, he's got kids, he's carried on the line, that's the thing that matters, and we just like forget about this thing which was kind of said before. So it'd be taken, like, they'd be happy, but also like I would not expect the kind of understanding of the nuance there from them.
Right. What about you, Marshall?
Yeah, it's definitely something that that does personally impact how I navigate the world, in the sense that, well, between my two identities as being Black American and Aero Ace, where I'm sorry about that, where the expectations are like by your 30s, like marriage, kids, home, live out the rest of your life, and if you don't do that, you're either like unhappy or something's wrong. When it's kind of like, I'm like, no, nothing's wrong. I'm just living my truth, and I don't expect everyone to, especially the elders of my family, to understand. But it's something that I can't live. I mean, I can't live for other people. I can't live for other people. So it's just like, I want to live my life and not look back and say, I wish I would have did this. But it does teach. But it does teach me that you can't live for other people. Especially when people expect you to do something, and breaking cultural norms. And yeah, it's something that's like I'm currently navigating right now. So it's definitely interesting, but I am very happy that the efforts that my family is putting to learn my identity. But it's definitely a long road ahead.
Yes, I think that's probably reminiscent in a lot of African diaspora cultures, I think. Michelle, what about you?
I would say that my identities have really strengthened each other. I think that even though it's been extremely difficult, I think to navigate both of these, it's made me stronger overall. I think that growing up, I really prioritized my ethnic identity, and I kind of knew that I was queer at around 9 years old, but I really just like forced myself not to deal with that until I was 18. So that was almost 10 years of just because I was just so overloaded with trying to figure out my ethnicity and my nationality, so that I didn't really think about it. But I think that by the time I was ready to deal with my sexuality, I think that I had learned so much from trying to reconcile, like, Chinese Americans seem so opposing, that I had already had the skills that I could just use to figure out my asexuality. So I would say that my process of accepting my sexuality was much smoother than my ethnicity because of my experiences. But I would say that I think that the way that people approach LGBTQIA plus as a whole is very Western, like throughout the world. That's why it can be seen as something that's Eurocentric, that's very white. I think that I've also been criticized that I'm trying to be white by leaning into asexuality, and I think that's really an unfair criticism that a lot of people of color receive. But I think that something that I've been working on is I've kind of realized and done a lot of research that in my heritage, in my Chinese heritage, and my history, that throughout these thousands of years, queerness has existed perfectly well with my ethnicity and with my history. And I think that looking back has really empowered me to realize that it isn't something that's modern or Western, that I think that queerness as a whole has deep roots, and also gender nonconformity as a whole has had deep roots within my culture and my heritage. And I've just been doing a lot of research because I'm fluent in Chinese. I'm able to do that. And I have just become very proud and looking back in general. And I think that I'm trying to make all of this information more accessible by doing a lot of translation work. I think that, especially coming from someone who is queer and is ace, I think looking at some of these things, I have a different perspective than most translators do. And so I try to bring more of the queerness and asexuality out of my Chinese heritage. And I think that that's helping a lot of people and realizing that, in fact, these two things, asexuality and Chinese Americanness, are not conflicting, and that these have existed. My Chinese identity and my asexuality and queerness in general have existed together for so much longer than a lot of other things. And I think that looking at that really makes me feel very powerful and strong. And mostly I'm just working on more translation work in general. And I feel like it's been my ace identity and ethnicity have been positive reinforcements of each other. Um, and I'm hopefully trying to share that with more people.
Thank you. And that's a very great mission to undertake. I don't know many other people that are doing that. So thank you. What about you, Leah?
I've had no issues in terms of the I've been pretty fortunate to have not any troubles with that. The only issue I've come across is representation and the lack of, and that has been yeah, that's been like one of the biggest, because when I was figuring out myself and going through it, like am I not, like is I'm questioning myself, um I would think, okay, well, maybe this is just something that's not for me because I don't see anybody else talking about it. And then it got me to thinking, or maybe I should, maybe it's just that something could be wrong with me because everybody is so sexualized and so open and just so frank with their, with all the sexy stuff that's going on. And I'm thinking, oh, maybe something is wrong with me. And I was thinking, and then it just made me question, and then that was like the hardest part of it. But thankfully, asexuality, a romantic, is becoming more open now and more spoken about, and we're having that representation, which is like really great. I'm thankful for that.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And Pragati?
Yeah, I did already speak about that, so I will not take too much time in this, but I will share that me being a demi typically means that it takes a considerable amount of time for me to start feeling anything for anybody, meaning sexual attraction, if at all, right? And somehow in my culture, that is seen as the proper way to date without realizing that it's not coming from a place of I'm going to make this decision, but more about what I just simply experience. But it is seen as the ideal way to date, wherein you're not simply hooking up and being trashy and being all westerny, all of these things. So I find it very interesting that some other people also spoke about how we feel a little bit of a guilt around reinforcing certain stereotypes and certain societal expectations. I also feel like that, but it also sometimes works for us, I guess.
Yeah, I think I think that's something I probably would experience if people didn't think I looked so slutty. Because on one hand, it's kind of like, okay, well, she's especially as I'm West Indian, I feel like a lot of West Indian people are religious. Most people in my family are either Catholic or Muslim, and thus they would kind of see me not being interested in having sex with people as being a positive if I didn't look if I didn't do all of the other stuff. So then it kind of skews that idea of me kind of falling into a kind of appealing ideal woman trope. But then there is still the kind of fetishization of purity that I think comes up, or the whole, okay, well, you guys are kind of being like a counterculture to the sexualized society and you're making a stand against it as opposed to just being asexual. I'm cautious of the time. I think, well, technically this doesn't finish for another 5 minutes. I'm aware we've been talking for 14 minutes. One thing I did want to ask is, do you think that how has it been interacting within your other members of your ethnicity as an asexual person? If we could go over that, please, if we have time.
So I'll try to be brief. I think I'm British Chinese. I've grown up in the UK, and actually, to be honest, like I don't have a large kind of community outside my immediate family who are kind of Chinese, and so I don't have loads of first-hand experience to draw on here. To the extent that I've kind of interacted with kind of family and family friends and things like that, I've not spoken about it really. So essentially, it's just not something which I've actually kind of gotten into.
Right. I can kind of relate to that too. Marshall, what about you?
I think because of my social circle being like small, I tend to not interact with a lot of people outside of that social group. But when I do, it's interesting. I still deal with misconceptions and a lot of, actually not some, but a lot of invalidation in a way, either out of ignorance or out of just plain being like rude. But hopefully the work we're doing helps combat that.
Thank you, Michelle.
I guess I'm on the opposite side of this. So I grew up in Detroit where I had no other Asian Americans around me. But I think that later I moved to LA, so California. And there are so many Asian Americans here, and just people of color in general. I thought I would feel so at home, like with like other people like me, also like children of immigrants, and also just having an Asian, especially East Asian background. But I think that because I was so queer, always, it made it extremely difficult to connect with all of these people, just on a lot of levels, unfortunately. And I think that even though I'm surrounded by so many people that look like me, that have had experiences similar to me, and have like a similar cultural heritage in general, I still feel extremely alienated just because they view queerness as this as this like white concept, right? And then they it's hard for them to understand that it can exist within somebody that's not white. And I think that I've been trying to do a lot of work to combat the stereotype, like you said, but it's definitely extremely difficult to to have connections with these people. And that makes it really hard because we're already a minority here, like Asian Americans as a whole, and also an invisible minority. People don't even think we exist. And I think that it feels the same as asexuality, so it's kind of like double the invisibility. It feels like that. And yeah, it's just hard to connect. Even though there's so many people around me, it's hard to actually have a deeper relationship with them just because it's hard for them to understand.
Yeah, I can empathize with that too. What about you, Leah?
Cool. My social circle is small, so the people I have told, they've embraced me with open arms, because my asexuality is my identity. It's part of me, so nothing would change. I haven't had any bad interactions So I think it's fine.
That's good. Pragati?
In my case, it's amazing because we did not have any kind of a collective or a group or any activism happening in India before I started it in 2014. Every new person that I meet is extremely happy when they discover about Indian Aces and is extremely happy that there is some representation happening in the country, even when they're outside of the country and they find out about Indian Aces. So it's quite good in my case.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that there's a lot of there seems to be a very big ACE community going on in India, and it is great to see that. Like, if I had to like list off countries where I've seen like there's a lot going on, India would be at the top of the list. So that is really great, and it's good to see. Like, I feel like for me, I do have a kind of small social circle, but I feel like there's a reason for that, and I also feel like I can look at the demographics of my social circle, and I'm aware that there's a reason why not so many people who are the same ethnicity as me hang out with me very often. And I think, and I don't know if it's just asexuality, but just kind of other aspects of my like kind of alternative subculture and all that kind of stuff has kind of influenced that. I think that West Indian cultures are quite old-fashioned and conformist in a sense, and thus that kind of influences how my interactions go. And even in activism, I can say that 90% of the work I get or the people that reach out to me are white. Most of the people who own the platforms or are interested in amplifying asexuality is very rarely coming from Black media. I can say probably twice in this whole year as anything came from any Black media. So I think that is definitely an area that the intersection needs to kind of grow in that sense. And hopefully that will happen. And it's definitely great to be able to have spaces like this so we can talk about these things and get perspectives from different backgrounds and different countries. So thank you all for being part of this panel. And thank you all for tuning in. I am immediately after this going to go on the Gather app to do a meet and greet. So you can probably find my little emoticon person wandering around over there trying to find where I'm supposed to be. And there's also going to be an ACE comedy piece going on over on Gather as well. So hopefully I will see some of you over there. And thank you all so much for tuning in. And I'll see you all. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.